So many times in these episodes, we've referred to going to sit under a tree ministering somewhere in Africa. And you'll see this big smile on my face because today I'm actually sitting with Riko Viviers.
That's right.
And the reason for my big smile is because the year that I started official youth work is the same year that he started with missionary work. And they were the infamous Russian team. So it's a great privilege to speak to Riko today and find out what happened with the Russian team. Riko, welcome.
Thank you.
And welcome to you guys back to another episode of Commissions, where we're going to talk about missions and the different aspects of missions. Riko, oh my word, where do we start? This is now long history. So you started off in 1994.
That's right, on a short-term mission outreach to Russia.
And then and you got a passion for the Russian people?
It surprised me actually. I've always been interested in people and countries, and I got this strange fascination with Russian as a language towards the end of my third years of studies. I even bought a dictionary and I started to study it at the language laboratory at the university, not realizing that soon God would call me to Russia, and then it started to make sense.
Wow. So even though you didn't realize that God's bigger picture, you were actually running pretty much in pace with what he had planned for your life.
Maybe I was picking up on the cues he was dropping me, so it wouldn't be too much of a transition or a shock for me later on.
Yeah. So, okay. So basically, you guys were in training, preparation for Russia, and then you went over. You were part of the team that went to Moscow.
That should have gone to Moscow.
It should have gone to Moscow.
Right. So 2 of our team of 6 actually went to Moscow and joined Liebenberg with Campus Crusade. 2, actually the other 4 weren't able to get the American budget in place we had to have. So speaking of dollars, but so 2 of them, the rest of the people went to Africa. And the other 2 of us were joined by a team of SAWE, or South African Action for World Evangelism.
Yes.
That was quickly put together to join Canadians ministering in the western part of Russia at the Black Sea in former communist youth camps.
Really?
To teach Christian Camping International. So I spent my short-term outreach joining Russians, learning about Christian camping, learning Russian language, and having been sent to the Far East on a 6 to 8 week trip to help the local Russians.
Okay, now you're talking about the Far East. What area was that?
It's on the eastern side of Siberia, or where Siberia starts to run into what they call the Far East of Russia, which is just north of the Chinese border. That makes a bit of a hump if you look at the map.
Yeah.
It's close to Vladivostok. It took us about 8 days by train to get there.
Wow, yeah, because there's that amazing train that goes from Moscow all the way to...
That's right.
Yeah, that takes, 2 weeks to do?
Well, I think you can get from Moscow to Vladivostok in about 9 days.
Wow, that is huge. Now, let's jump a little bit forward. Except now for the time period that you're here in South Africa, but you actually living full time in that far eastern side of Russia. Where are you guys living?
That's right. I've been in Yakutia permanently since September 1995. And Yakutia is an interesting province. It's almost the most far east province of Russia. We have 1 or 2 or 3 between us and Alaska, or the Bering Strait. And it's a very huge province. It's the biggest province in Russia of the 87 provinces. And it's very comparable to Alaska, in fact. It's 3 times the size of South Africa. There's just a little less than 1 million people and lots of different people groups. And we live and work in the southern part of Yakutia.
Okay, so now how did you, forgive me for a lack of a better term, how did you get stuck in that part of the Russian world?
I never knew about those parts. It was interesting that while still preparing for Russia, knowing that we were supposed to minister in Moscow, in this big modern city, I had this image of a log house in the middle of the woods covered by snow for some unexplainable reason. And then during the first short-term outreach, we actually got to these far uninhabited parts of Russia.
Okay.
I didn't realize it was to be more than just a phase or a short-term outreach. But I remember very clearly visiting a friend, a missionary friend in Yakutia, and he was folding out a map on his apartment floor and showing me the people groups of Yakutia and where they live, and very specifically the Evenki. And he was saying, wow, look at these small little dots, so farly removed from each other, so sparsely spread out across huge expanses of Siberia. And he says, they are living in places that are so difficult to reach. It's where the road stops, and even furthermore into the woods, traveling on reindeer or by snowmobiles.
On reindeer?
And I remember this thought, somehow coming from somewhere that, wow, I don't even know Russian yet, and I need to learn Evenki. So when I came back from my short-term outreach, God started to work on that seed. And eventually I returned to minister.
So I've got a question. So what did you actually do? What was the ministry that you did amongst those people?
Initially, joining up forces with the local Christian churches over there, evangelical Christians, we started to reach out to small Evenki villages.
Okay.
There's a village close to where we live, so we started visiting them on Sunday afternoons after church service, and we started meeting people and talking about Christ, and soon we had a little group formed. A couple of times I started to reach out to them in the woods as such. At one stage I lived with them in the tents for about 4 months.
Okay, I'm going to interrupt you there. So I heard rumors about this living accommodation arrangement. You're referring to them living in tents in the snow. Do I understand it right?
Yes, you're right.
And the whole family lives in one tent, basically.
Well, we were in a small camp of 3 tents. So the foreman and his wife and their grandchild were living in the main tent, a big tent, and they had the fire going mostly throughout the night and throughout the day. Because
and that's where the fire is in the middle of it.
In a small metal box with a chimney going out.
Wow.
Because of the baby, but we were living with a few of their helpmates, I guess, or assistants. 3 guys in one tent and their son and his wife in another tent. So it's 3 tents.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, so they do the tent thing and no permanent structures. So do they also move around?
They are semi-nomadic, which means they would travel across a certain area in the space of a year. For winter vegetation, for example, they would be in one spot, summer elements being best to navigate in another spot, and they would have a bit of a circle they might do in, let's say, 300, 400 kilometers area where they would travel.
And you would be building relationship and sharing the gospel with people around.
Oh, I had very high expectations of myself. Yes, I would tell them the gospel and they will come to Christ. It turned out to be much more difficult to enter their life, understand their culture, their mentality. I think they soon found out that they had misconceptions of me as well. And it was a fun time. Something like what you do in army. You never wish to do it again, but you love telling the stories.
Now, so you would say that different cultures can actually have a severe influence in reaching out to people?
Oh, yes, it can. Yes, it can. I think I never, I underestimated to a large part the uniqueness of an animist culture in Siberia and their ways of interpreting religion and the image of Christianity that the Russians as such have, Russian Orthodox Christianity.
All right, so Father God had a big surprise for you in your ministry. You actually met your wife there.
Yes, I did.
So now is the stage where we start smiling, and I would like to ask you, how did that happen?
In 2002, still ministering among the Evanki, the Russian pastor with whom I was staying and helping him, he commandeered up the brothers of the region, southern region of Yakutia, and said, guys, arrange your leave, get a week of leave arranged, but we will travel to Yakutsk. There's going to be a missionary conference and everyone should go. So I had no problem with that, and we traveled all the way up to Yakutsk, which was 500 kilometers north, traveling with on ice roads. And we had a 3-day conference. Well, actually 5. The last 2 days was in Yakut language. And in Russian, many churches coming from all over would share and tell the stories of how God started to move in their hearts and how they were formed. And I remember at this conference, in the beginning of the conference, there was an open seat right next to me. And there was a young lady, Yakut lady, modestly dressed and rather attractive, quietly moving across the hall, looking for open seats, and she found one right next to me. And we introduced ourselves. We had a little bit of chat, and we met again while helping with the preparation of food in the evenings. So that's when I met Mariana, which she came from the Yakut people group, or the Sacha as they call themselves, who was at that stage a people group having been influenced by the gospel and having started to go through a revival. And she had been in youth and Sunday school ministry for a couple of years by then.
So then God just surprised you with not only sending you to the far east of Russia and doing work in the most hysterical ways, but he also introduced you to your wife. How long have you guys been married now?
We have been married for 17 years now.
17 years. And 5 kids, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes, we have 5 kids.
Wow. Now, I've met some of them, and they actually speak Afrikaans, or they can understand Afrikaans.
Well, the youngest 2 are still working on their fluency and confidence, but all of them can understand, and the older kids speak Afrikaans quite well.
And also, while we're talking about the languages, so you learned how to speak Russian. And now, is there a different dialect to the far east of Russia to, let's say, Moscow, for instance? Was that something difficult to learn?
Actually, no. Russian is the same all the way through from the very east to the west because of the way the communists uplifted literacy in Russia.
Wow.
Very standardized, even more than Afrikaans in South Africa.
Really? Okay, and that naturally made things much easier.
Yes.
Okay, and you're fluent at this stage in Russian?
My wife would say so, yes.
Nice. So cultural adjustments. I mean, because there's how would I say it now? Not only in the difference between South Africa and Russia, but also from Moscow, where you expected, to now being in the far east of Russia. What kind of challenges did you have, adjustments did you have?
There were a lot of challenges. I think the first one that was looming up to be very big was the approaching Siberian winter. And of all the stories we heard, we had quite a bit of anticipation for seeing minus 45, minus 50 and below. So that was the excitement in the beginning, just to survive. But like they say, when you're in Rome, do like the Romans. So we started to dress like the locals and ask advice. And eventually we saw ourselves, our bodies to be very adaptive. And I can remember dressing everything I have and wondering what will I do if the temperature goes down another 5 degrees. But by that time, I would be starting to take off jackets and jerseys because I would be adapting to the temperature. So that went on all the way through the entire winter. And eventually we found out it's quite survivable. I mean, people live there, just do what they do. I think something that was more of a challenge was understanding the history and the cultural components,
Oh, yes.
the ethnic understanding and mentality of the local people. It was much easier to understand the Russians. They have a diet, or let's say a way of eating, a choice of foods that is quite close to South Africa. Basically, many of the same products. They like soup much more, but that's explainable because in the winter that keeps you hot, warm.
Yeah, yeah.
A lot of tea drinking, so coffee is not so great. But yeah, if you can sit and drink 4, 5, 6 cups in a row, then you're made for Siberia.
Okay.
And then the challenge was understanding the local people groups. The Evenki, for example, the Yakut, they share animism. The Evenki, I think, were much steeper into animism than the Yakut, even though said now, because of the numbers of the Yakut population and their success in reviving their culture and their language, they are now more active in spiritual worship, fire worship,
Okay.
and spirits of nature, and things like that. So how to communicate the gospel, how to navigate through their misunderstandings, because they've been exposed to Russian orthodoxy.
Yes.
So in their mind, you're coming from that angle.
Yeah.
And you have to work through all the things that they have had in their minds, misunderstandings and conceptions, and then understand the animism. But I think that was one of the things that I found very difficult.
Okay. Now that you're married to somebody from Russia, and you living there basically full time, what kind of cultural effect between South Africa and Russia, challenges that you have to overcome?
Well, the interesting thing is that Mariana was, even before we met, very apt to cultural adaptation. She spent a year in Romania for studies. She has an ability to pick up languages quite well. She speaks Afrikaans even better than English.
Okay.
So in that sense, it was like God preparing just a lot of ways to have a very comfortable relationship and a very blessed and very happy marriage in that sense. And I think that has helped a lot, both for me to adapt in Russia. It made it much easier in many senses, having children as well. You move into many levels of society with much more ease. And in Russia, in South Africa, her adaptability and language abilities has made it easier for her to adapt to the people I know and that we move amongst in South Africa as well, being
That's
more
amazing.
Afrikaans than English, actually.
Yeah, that is just amazing. Now, currently, because of the conditions in the world, you guys are in South Africa and waiting to go back home. You would call Russia your home now?
Actually, yes. We are starting to settle in more in South Africa in the last 2 years. That COVID has provided more than ample reason for being here. But we are quite settled in Russia, and that is that's basically our home.
Future plans?
Future plans, we would like to go back and continue our ministry among the youth. We have big plans for our region as well, since we have been more involved in youth ministry republic-wide, but our own region needs more attention in that regards. And helping with evangelism in the greater Yakutia as well, in the summer months especially.
I can say Yakutia as well. How was that? How was my accent?
That's good. It's time to come and visit.
Now, I did see some photos of where they live and the snowy conditions and stuff like that. I'm not sure. Apparently, you need hair to keep warm on that side. All right, so Riko, how do you say goodbye in Russian?
Well, the formal way would be "До свидания."
До свидания.
Which is actually like cool. See you again sometime.
Okay.
До свидания.
До свидания.
Or you could say just paka if you're talking to a friend. Till
Paka.
later.
It sounds like pack your stuff and go. Paka and go. So I like the Asta Vidanya.
Das svidanya.
Das Vidanya. Ooh, okay. So I'm going to say to you guys, Das Vidanya until we meet again. Riko, thank you very much for joining me and sharing your history and your ministry.
It's a pleasure. You're welcome.
And we'll see you guys next time in the next episode. Das Vidanya.